Donald Trump is promising a miracle. He stands in the White House at a Christmas reception and says, "This is the golden age of America. Factories and plants opening by the thousands. They're coming from Germany, Japan, Canada, because they don't want to pay tariffs." He claims his tariff war is working so well that trillions in investments are pouring into the US. Foreign factories are stampeding across the border, and America is about to enter a manufacturing boom, the likes of which we've never seen. But then you look at the actual numbers. US manufacturing has been shrinking for 9 straight months. Unemployment has ticked up. The Fed just cut interest rates to keep the economy from stalling. And businesses are telling survey after survey that tariff chaos is one of the reasons they're not investing. So which is it? Is Trump really stealing factories from Canada and the rest of the world? Or is the Golden Age mostly a story he tells while the real economy quietly takes the hit? Tonight on Huge Press Room, we're going to break down what Trump actually said about this Golden Age, what the data says about manufacturing, investment, and jobs, whether Canadian plants are really relocating to the US because of tariffs, and how this hype affects Prime Minister Mark Carney's strategy for defending Canada in the trade war. You're watching Huge Press Room. If you want more deep dives on Trump versus Canada, tariffs, border chaos, and power politics, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it. Let's start in the room where Trump sold the dream. It's mid-December, a Christmas reception in the White House Cross Hall. Trump is surrounded by donors, officials, cameras, and he lays out his pitch. Tariffs are bringing back factories. Foreign companies are racing to build in America. A massive investment wave, 18 trillion according to Trump, is flooding into the US thanks to his tariff policy. He says factories from Germany, Japan, and Canada are coming in because they don't want to pay tariffs. Within 6 months to a year, the US will see a manufacturing boom, the likes of which this country has never seen. That's the story. Now here's the reality that reporters and economists point out. US manufacturing activity has contracted for 9 consecutive months, according to the Institute for Supply Management. Unemployment has edged up from 4.3% to 4.4%, not collapsed, but moving the wrong way if you're promising a boom. The Federal Reserve just cut interest rates by 0.25 percentage points to support a weakening economy and soften the blow from tariffs. An independent analysis of Trump's 18 trillion boast shows the White House's own inflated investment tally is around $9.6 trillion, not 18. That figure includes a lot of projects that were already planned or would have happened without tariffs. So the first thing we have to say is Trump's Golden Age story is way ahead of the actual numbers. The question is, does that mean nothing is happening? Or that the story is more complicated than he wants you to see? Now let's bring Canada into this. In his speech, Trump doesn't just say factories are moving from Asia. He specifically name-checks Canada. They're coming from Germany, they're coming from Japan, they're coming from Canada. Many factories are coming in because they don't want to pay tariffs. He wants American voters to picture this. Canadian plants panicking about tariffs, shutting down in Ontario or Quebec, reopening on the US side of the border, with grateful workers thanking Trump for their jobs. There are some high-profile announcements he can point to. Auto and battery investments in US states that include money from Japanese, European, and Canadian-related firms, a big Toyota investment, mining and critical minerals deals that the White House loves to hype. But when you zoom out to the full picture, here's what you find. A lot of companies are not rushing in. They're delaying decisions because tariff rules keep changing. In some sectors, tariffs have pushed US companies to move production to third countries to avoid American duties, the opposite of reshoring. Canada, under Carney, is responding by diversifying trade to Europe and Asia. not simply surrendering plants to the US. There is no evidence of thousands of Canadian factories physically lifting up and marching south. What's really happening is more subtle. Some projects are shifting or expanding in the US to hedge against tariffs. Some are shifting away from the US entirely. Many are stuck in limbo, frozen while executives wait for clarity from the Supreme Court and from future elections. Trump is taking that messy reality and selling the happiest possible version of it. So let's strip it down to three key questions. Are tariffs causing some investment to move into the US? Are they causing damage in Canada? Does that add up to a golden age or just expensive chaos? Question 1. Are tariffs pulling in some investment? Yes, to a point. Tariffs create a tax penalty on importing from Canada, Mexico, China, and others. For some sectors, especially where the US market is huge, it can be cheaper to build or expand inside the US than pay those tariffs forever. So you get announcements like auto suppliers choosing a US state instead of Ontario, mining and critical mineral deals being signed with US-based operations backed by the White House. The White House takes every one of those announcements, adds them up, double counts some, and presents a big shiny number like $9.6 trillion in investments associated with its policies. Trump then rounds that up to $18 trillion and calls it historic. So yes, there is some inflow, but... Question 2. Are tariffs damaging Canada and the US at the same time? Also yes. On the Canadian side, tariffs have hit steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and manufactured goods, dragging on growth and forcing Ottawa into emergency loans and support programs. Border uncertainty has messed with truck routes, factory schedules, and investment plans that used to be built on a stable relationship. That pain is real. But on the US side, manufacturing is still shrinking 9 months in a row. Tariff uncertainty is named by business groups as a key reason they're holding back on big projects. Consumers pay higher prices for imported goods and for US-made products that rely on imported inputs. So what Trump calls a boon looks in the data like a trade-induced slowdown with some flashy winners and a much larger group of quiet losers. Question 3, does that look like a golden age? Or like expensive chaos? If you judge by boasts and speeches, big round investment numbers, and cherry-picked factory headlines, you might say, wow, it's working. If you judge by manufacturing contraction, rate cuts, business surveys, and nervous supply chain managers, it looks a lot less golden. Now put yourself in Mark Carney's shoes for a second. You're the Prime Minister of Canada. You're watching the US economy wobble under Trump's tariffs. You hear him say factories from Canada are coming in by the thousands. What do? Carney's response so far has basically been a two-track strategy. Track 1, don't panic, but don't trust the boom story. Carney's team knows Trump can sell the dream of a golden age for years before anything close to that shows up in the data, if it ever does. The Supreme Court still hasn't ruled on whether Trump's emergency tariff weapon is even legal, so they can't base Canada's future on either. Trump's hype about factories fleeing to the US, or the hope that US courts will swoop in and fix everything. Instead, they offer targeted support to sectors hit hardest by tariffs, look for ways to keep key plants in Canada with tax credits and subsidies, and quietly lobby US companies that rely on Canadian suppliers to pressure Washington from the inside. Track 2, build a world where US tariffs matter less. You see this in 3 big moves. Trade diversification, more deals and volumes with Europe and Asia, not just the US energy and pipelines. Projects aimed at sending oil, gas, and critical minerals to Asia and Europe directly. Defense and industry, plugging into Europe's 150B Safe War Fund so Canadian firms can win contracts outside the US system. The message to investors is, Yes, Trump is loud. Yes, tariffs are disruptive. But we're building options so your entire business doesn't live or die on what he tweets next. In other words, Carney is betting that Trump's golden age doesn't fully materialize and that companies will value stability more than raw tariff threats. So where does that leave us? Let's be fair. Trump's tariffs do change behavior. Some factories and investments are moving into the US to avoid duties. Canada is taking real damage in certain industries. At the same time, the promised golden age is not showing up yet in the macro data. Manufacturing is still in a mini recession. The White House's investment figures are inflated and Trump's own 18T brag goes way beyond even those. So here's the honest answer. Yes, Trump is grabbing some factories and projects at Canada's expense, but he's also setting fire to the wider economic house they both live in. That's not a golden age. That's a high-risk experiment where both neighbors can end up poorer, even if a few headline factories cross the border. So I'll leave you with this. When you hear Trump promise a tariff-led golden age and brag that factories from Canada are flocking to America, do you see a strategic master plan that's really working? Or a politician selling hype while the real numbers and the Fed quietly tell you something very different? And if you're sitting in Canada right now, do you try to outbid Trump to keep every factory? Or do you accept that some will move and focus on building a diversified economy that doesn't live and die on the US border? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want more deep dives on Trump versus Canada tariffs, courts, and Carney's countermoves, check out our other videos here on Huge Press Room. Tariff Judgment Day. Is the Supreme Court about to erase Trump's Canada tariffs? Carney's 25% steel bomb. Did Canada just launch its own Trump-style trade war? From best friend to 51st state, how Trump drove US-Canada relations to rock bottom. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Trump versus Canada. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.